Hari Om. Today I am going to discuss on the subject of depression. But the discussion is going to be from yoga perspective. Depression is often considered a negative experience of life. Negative events cause depression, failure, breakup of relationships, some kind of health issues can result in depression. Yoga has a different perspective on depression. If you look at the yogic texts, every yogic text, including Ashtanga Yoga text of Patanjali, or Hatha Yoga, or most important is Bhagavad Gita, or even philosophy of Bhagwan Buddha, they talk about depression as the first step of yoga. And this is interesting. Depression is considered extremely negative experience of life for we consider it in our society. But the yogis have always taken it as a first step to start your journey of looking inwards. Yoga is a journey that allows you to look inside. I'm going to tell you a few stories. The first story is the story of Lord Ram, the epic of Ramayana, the story of Rama and his life is a very interesting story. The negativities that Lord Ram faced are something that we cannot even imagine. He was born into a royal family in the kingdom of Ayodhya in North India. And he was a very intelligent and a very wonderful human being, very generous and compassionate at heart, very wise, but also very powerful because he was trained into the warfare. He was very eligible to become the next king. And he was the eldest, so the tradition was the eldest son becomes the next prince. He was very popular in the kingdom. People loved him because he was very accessible. He had that empathy, he had that kindness, he had that compassion, and he had that wisdom to make the decision of right and wrong. He was known to protect the weak. He was known to uphold the justice. People loved him. He got married over a period of time to a beautiful princess. Her name was Sita. And then his father decided that he should be given the charge of the kingdom. And the king wanted to retire. But the Rama's stepmother, Kaikeyi, didn't want Ram to become the king. So she played the dirty politics. There's always politics for power. And the worthy people are often not getting their due share, stripped of his rights. And that stepmother Kaikeyi stripped Rama of his right to become the king and forced the king to send Ram into 14 years in the forest in exile. Now this is complete injustice. And Ram had all the physical abilities, all the strength to fight back and take his rights. But he was committed to keeping his word. He was committed to respecting his parents. And just because of these commitments, he accepted that decision without any complaint. And he left into the forest. His wife accompanied him and his younger brother Lakshman also accompanied him. Now in the forest, life was never easy for him. It was tough time. Resources are not easily available in forest. But he was very happy there. In the forest, his wife was hijacked by a demon king Ravan just because she was very beautiful and he liked her. Ravan wanted to marry her. So he took away Lord Rama's wife and hijacked her. Ram had no army. There was no support. He didn't know where his wife is gone. But he never lost his courage. Once first he was asked to go into the forest. He was stripped of his right to become the king. Never lost his courage, never went into depression. When his wife was hijacked, never went into depression. Whatever was available to him, made best of it, found help in the army of monkeys, met his beloved disciple Hanuman, and with the help of these monkeys, created an army, fought with the demon king Ravan, fought for the honor of his wife, freed her, and came back to his kingdom. Look at the story. There was every chance that he would get depressed at every point of time, but he never lost his courage. What is the reason for that? The reason goes back before he became the eligible prince to become the king. So before this drama where he was sent into the forest, this event has happened. And what was that event? Thinking about the sufferings of life, thinking about the uncertainties of life, Ram became depressed. And his guru helped him. His guru's name was Rishi Vasishtha. And Vasishtha helped Ram come out of this depression. And then that depression, he was asked to practice yoga techniques. And this yoga techniques, practicing yoga, built resources and abilities in him. So that depression was actually very good, because that allowed Ram to build these virtues and resilience that helped him fight in future. Now, if you move to the story of Buddha, again the story goes like this, that Buddha was a prince and he was beloved by people, he was beloved by his parents, he was appreciated by everyone. But then he saw the uncertain nature of life. There is a story that he saw this old man, he saw the sick man, and he saw a dead body. And that made him aware of temporary nature of our life. And the temporary nature of life brought this pain and suffering, dukkha, to him. And when he was so depressed with this, one day he left his royal life and he went into the forest and practiced all these meditations and yoga techniques with his masters, with his gurus. And then he came out of that depression, because yoga allows you to build the resources, the resilience, the different abilities you need to stand on your own with courage. And then what happened to Buddha? He came back to the society. After he became realized, he came back to society. The same society where he had experienced death. He must have seen many dead bodies after he came back to society. But the same dead body that made him depressed before becoming Buddha, now that same dead body did not make him depressed. What had changed? He had built the resilience. He had developed the wisdom through the practices of yoga. Now Buddha and Shri Ram, I told you the stories. There's another very important historical yoga master, the god of yoga as he is called, Yogeshwar, and that is Shri Krishna. Shri Krishna's story is really inspiring. Why? It has inspired generations for 5,000 years. It has inspired the people for 5,000 years, like the story of Buddha has inspired us for 2,500 years. Krishna's story has inspired for 5,000 years. And Sri Rama's story, Ramayana, has inspired for 7,500 years. So let's go back to Shri Krishna's story. What is so special about it? The story is something that tells you how much extreme negativity one can face in his or her life. Shri Krishna's story is one such very stressful and a story that just shows the pain and suffering all the time. But what he did in that story is most important. How he stood up, how he showed that resilience, how he showed that courage, and most importantly, the absolute unconditional love in any situation is what is Shri Krishna all about. When Shri Krishna was born, he was the 8th child of his parents. His parents, his mother was a princess, and her own brother put her into prison because an astrologer predicted that the 8th son of her will kill this brother. So her name was Devaki and her brother's name was Kansa. So the prediction was the 8th son, that is Shri Krishna, will kill the Kansa. That was a prediction. And because of that, this Kansa put his own sister into prison and killed first 7 of Krishna's siblings. So when Krishna was born, his mother had no idea if he will survive or not because she was in prison. But somehow Krishna's father took him, they escaped. And a prince born into a royal family was taken away from his mother immediately after the birth. That's the start of Shri Krishna's life. He was raised in a cowherds group in a place called Gokul. So in a very rural place, a royal prince was growing. But this Kansa was in search because in prison they couldn't find the baby. So then he wanted to kill all the young kids, young babies born in last few days. So since the birth, the attacks on Shri Krishna's life started. And then some secret agents of this Kansa informed him that there is some special child who has some exceptional abilities in Gokul where Shri Krishna was living. So they were referring to Shri Krishna, a baby Krishna. Now Kansa had already invited a lot of negative public opinion about him. So he could not just go and randomly kill, but he sent some secret agents to kill Shri Krishna, even when he was baby, even when he was growing. With the courage and wisdom, this little Shri Krishna survived all these attacks on his life. When he was age 15, by that time Shri Krishna had established himself as a very wise, very compassionate, a leader of those cowherd groups. And by the time the Kansa realized that if there is this 8th son of his sister, then it must be Shri Krishna. So he invited Shri Krishna for a gladiator fight. See the birth, see the first 15 years and see now what's happening. And he thrust the most powerful of his gladiators on Shri Krishna to kill him. Shri Krishna was not a very big guy. So he had to fight these gladiators. He defeated them but did not kill them. He defeated his uncle and he killed his uncle there. Then the story should end happily ever after, but it did not. Because that uncle's father-in-law was a big emperor, very powerful emperor. His name was Jarasandha. And then Jarasandha got very angry because his son-in-law was killed by Shri Krishna. So Jarasandha's empire, the armies, they started attacking this kingdom. Now Shri Krishna didn't want the war because he was always up against the war. So what he had to do? He had to flee his kingdom. He had to go away from the kingdom to stop this emperor from destroying his kingdom and killing his people. And the story continued. He had to build another kingdom. Now look, so much of intense events happening in his life. And look what he stands for. He stands for unconditional love. He stands for justice and truth. He stands for the weakest. His friends included the weakest. He supported everyone who was around him. He respected women to the highest. Shri Krishna's ideology talks about women as the most respected in the society. He represents unconditional love, acceptance, and these qualities are what made him the idol of yoga. So now we can just imagine the courage that he had inside of him to face any situation, any eventuality, and stand up. Where does it all come from? It comes from yoga. So this depression that comes out of suffering and pain, dukkha. Remember this, dukkha, pain, suffering is the starting point. From there the depression comes. But then that's the time when we should all practice yoga. And why does this pain and suffering come? Yoga says when we reject and refuse to accept the changing situations in our life, that's when the depression comes. We don't accept that I am a failure in this particular aspect, or in this exam, or in this business, or in this relationship. I don't accept it. And that's where depression starts. Or some health condition comes and I just don't accept that I can get this. That's where depression starts. Refusal to accept the changes is the very important reasons. No acceptance of reality is another perspective that yoga presents for depression. And of course, we know now that depression is no hopes and no optimism. That also yoga supports. But yoga says that this is a time for us to build more resources, develop virtues, change our perspective, open ourselves more, become more flexible, so that in future we can contribute positively to ourselves, to our life, and enrich others, enrich their life, contribute back to the society, contribute to the nature. So it's very important that depression should be taken as a positive thing. I am saying something more interesting. There are different sages and different seers and yoga masters. They have also experienced depression, and that's caused the change in their life. They have moved on to yoga, and with yoga they developed the strengths and then again went back to the life with full commitment and courage. Sant Jnaneshwar, another great sage who lived in the 10th, 11th century here in the state of India. His name was Santa Jnaneshwar. And he was very depressed. His story is also very interesting. His father was a monk, but he became a monk after the marriage. So his guru did not allow him to stay there, sent him back. And then when he came back, the society would not accept his father. So his father and his mother gave up their life because someone suggested that if they commit suicide, probably the society will accept the kids. So they gave up their life, but still the society did not accept Santa Jnaneshwar and his siblings. But look, what Santa Jnaneshwar did in his life is fantastic. His teachings are still worshipped and followed after 800, 900 years of his samadhi. And this is the courage that we can build with the practices of yoga that will allow us to fight this depression and negativity. So I'm just presenting you a different perspective on depression. I'm going to stop here. I hope you will think more about it.